for the City Commission for Tuesday, February 20th, 2024 will come to order. Please join me in silencing your cell phones. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Cleveland.
Here.
Vice Mayor Perrine.
Here.
Commissioner Hartman.
Here.
Commissioner Martin.
Here.
Commissioner McGurk.
Here.
Thank you.
We're here tonight to discuss Chapter 50 and the historic preservation. And so we'd like to open with public participation, noting that there will be a significant portion presentation by Senior City Planner Bob Mathan. So I will entertain at this time anyone who wants to speak on the topic. You'll be given 3 minutes. This is your monologue to talk to the commission directly. Won't be answering questions, but the city clerk and the city manager are taking notes, so if there's a requirement or need to get back in touch with you, when you come up to the podium, your name and address, if you don't mind. You'll see a green light come on. With a minute remaining, you'll see a yellow light, and then a red light is when you'll be finished. With that said, if there any citizen who wishes to speak, please approach the podium and you will be heard for the City Commission at this time. Mr. Wilson.
Palmer Wilson, 101 Donlin Drive here in New Smyrna Beach. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Following the 50 issue for quite some time, I would like to state that I have read the NSB Alliance proposed changes and concur completely with them. They are thoughtful and complete, but most importantly, they demonstrate a true respect for property owner rights, which is lacking in the proposed city version of this chapter. The Alliance revisions are without a doubt a clear example of where government's approach to historic preservation should be, and that is a voluntary acceptance and commitment as opposed to government overreach. I'd like to comment on 3 major areas. 1, I propose the removal of the demolition oversight by this non-elected Historic Preservation Board. I've reviewed each and every instance of demolition requested since 2010 and find no need for such oversight given the deplorable condition of the buildings in question. Of the 11, 13 were approved with City Commission overriding the HPC on the 2 they denied. Since the National Historic Districts are awarded without any concurrent oversight authorization, it seems improper for NSB to apply. Adding to this concern is the potentiality that due to no lack of due process when the contributing building designation was made to certain properties, nor any indication that this status is even mentioned or noticed during real estate transactions, the problem is clearly discussed during the last December's public meeting on Chapter 50. This, coupled with what I just spoke about, to raise demolition fines and construction delays without demonstrating a need for same, seems foolish and improper. So I support the elimination of this change and, in fact, support the elimination of all punitive action by the Historic Preservation Commission. Finally, the abysmal track record of trying to entice residents of the 2 National Historic Districts into agreeing to becoming a locally designated district has demonstrated the frugality of such and lack of desire by the residents to participate. As it costs a great deal of taxpayer money every time this group puts us up again, I would suggest this be removed, or at least that we retain the 66 2/3% as opposed to lowering to 50 plus 1. That still maintains certified local government agreement. In closing, the public's made it clear last June during the text amendment that they wanted the government to stay away from impacting their property rights. I agree with that. And I would close by giving you the mayor's comment last week when a proposal for Flagler Avenue was proposed. He suggested less punitive and more incentive. I would change it to less punitive and absolutely voluntary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your comments. Is there anyone else for public participation? Dr. Herman.
Mayor, City Commission, and staff, good evening.
I noted that we were starting at a rather unusual time, 5:15. When I lived in the Commonwealth, all the TV programs started at 8:02, and I always thought that was odd. But I don't remember us meeting at 5:15 before, but thank you for that. What I'd like to comment on is more a general comment, and you may agree with what I say, you may disagree, or you may agree with parts of it. But that's part of, I think, what is wonderful about the public participation is the fact that people can come up and speak their mind and be heard and enter into the process. Taking off from the previous speaker, one of the things that concerns me is when logic fails, it's often due to an emotional content. And I think this topic is very emotionally charged. And on one hand, what is Chapter 50? But it's a bunch of words and an attempt by the city to hopefully make things better. But obviously, people disagree on that. On one side, we seem to have part of the community that feels it's an infringement on their property rights, property ownership. On the other side, we have people who are also terribly afraid that what limited historical buildings we have in our city will be gone. And we know factually that many of them are going and have gone. So it is a true issue for our community. But if it's based on this fear, and I'm saying this from somebody who's privileged. I'm a privileged white male that got a loan early on in my life, and I was able to buy homes. I bought historic homes. I restored them. I paid the heavy price sometimes of restoring, and had the joy and frustration of that, but even made some economic gain. So, I'm speaking from some sense of personally benefiting from historic designations, but also frustrated at times by regulations, as the man has just talked about. So I hope as this workshop goes forward, we don't let the emotion cloud what I hope will come out of this workshop is some way to make this city move forward so people who have property don't feel that their rights are being imposed. Nobody has real right to property. To quote Chief Seattle, none of us really own land. We're only here temporarily. And I think we need to remember that and be humbled by that. But we're here tonight to talk about how do we approach this very important topic. And so I welcome this debate, and I hope it will be fruitful. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your comments. Architect Pendergast.
Hello, Jay Pendergast, 5900 South Atlantic Avenue. I've always been an advocate of the carrot and the stick approach, and that's always been kind of contradictory to most of our codes. And when I reviewed everything in the historic preservation thing today, the grant program doesn't go far enough. It doesn't include the business community at all. It only really includes residents. Most of the residential properties that are historic aren't in the historic district. They're on the west side. So I really think if we want to, we should put our money where our mouth is, and we should be doing something with the grant program, because the grant program does absolutely nothing to protect our historic buildings that are in the commercial district. And if you're above a certain income level, you're not qualified. And a perfect example is like the Women's Club. There's nothing in our grant program that's going to help save that building. So I think that's one area that we went too far. And the other area that I think we should stick with is where they're trying to change the voting percentage. I mean, that's completely out of step with what's going on in Florida right now. Our legislatures are doing everything they can to make it more and more difficult for citizens to change our laws and have amendments. So they're pushing for 66%. They're not saying 50 plus 1. I'd be very happy if they would say 50 plus 1. So I think that we should leave that percentage alone because it's more in keeping with the times. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your comments. Are there more public participants? Diane.
Diane Bean, 304 Cedar Avenue. I believe that, and I don't have proof of it, but I believe that we have more people restoring historic homes in this town than we ever have before. So someone in this last meeting said, what are you afraid of? And I think, what are you afraid of? People are restoring the historic homes. And I agree with previous speakers that let's just provide incentives instead of more regulations. Give people help. Some people who have historic homes who can't afford it, I would be in favor of helping that out. But putting more regulations in place is not what I would vote for. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate your comments. Welcome, Dr. Herman.
Angie Beretta Herman, 108 Esther Street. I am really not sure what to say that I haven't already said to all of you about the importance of historic preservation in our city and the impact that it has on our reputation, as an economic driver for us. I don't think what's in Chapter 50 in any way takes away from anyone's property rights. I think that what is really important is for all of you to realize the decisions that you make about historic preservation are going to follow you and follow all of us in the community for many years to come. I'm really concerned about us making sure that we adhere to our charter, to our comprehensive plan, and to our regulations that actually support and encourage in every way possible the retention of our historic core. I've mentioned this to you before. There are only 83 properties on the beach side that are within the National Historic District. We're talking about very few properties there. We're only talking about 410 on the mainland. Of those 410, 313 are contributing properties and 97 are non-contributing properties. So in our whole city, we're talking about 500 properties. That's all we have that have any kind of a designation at all. And it's really important, I think, for us to realize, and I have a lot of contact with tourists as a result of being at the farmers market for many years, selling tickets for the home tour. People come to this city for a particular reason. They come because it's charming. There is a diversity of housing here that they see as attractive. And they like the kind of cottage feel of New Smyrna Beach. I beg you, don't relinquish that. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate your comments. Ms. Gillespie.
I'm Sally Gillespie. I live at 610 North Peninsula. I thought maybe a little history of our historic preservation ordinance might be appropriate. So I have section 163.31776A 3.1 of Florida statutes, which requires that the future land use element of a city's comp plan include criteria to ensure the protection of natural and historic resources. So by Florida statute, we have to do something. Now, we do have it in our comp plan, so it usually follows that there is some legislative follow-up, and for that, it has been Chapter 50. The revision, I think, and the amendments offered currently are good, solid ones, and in keeping with the Florida statutes directions. But while we have been talking about Chapter 50 for several years, our districts have been changing. In my own neighborhood, I have seen them changing. So it is up to you, the City Commission, to decide whether our historic neighborhoods, forget about National Register districts and local districts for a minute, because most of our historic neighborhoods are not under those umbrellas. So come up with your vision as to how you would like our city to look. If you believe, as many of us do, that it is an economic driver for us, then I suggest you spend the same amount of money that has been spent on revising Chapter 50 on hiring a consultant who knows how to save historic districts in Florida. Go to CLG, we're a certified local government city, for free. They can give us guidance on the consultant to find for this. And then when you have those recommendations as to how to serve our neighborhoods, put that on a ballot and have the people of the city decide if they want to preserve these historic districts and keep this economic driver or whether they don't. Listening to citizens like us coming before you is not getting us. It's not moving the needle. So please take leadership for this important issue, because we will lose the districts, just as Daytona Beach did, except more rapidly than us. Thank you so much, and I do hope you will take positive action soon.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate your comments. There are others for public participation. Evening, sir.
Yeah, perhaps you could educate me a little bit. The
Just your
the way that
name and
these,
address for the record, sir.
I'm sorry?
Just your name and address for the record.
Doug Thompson, 400 Rush Street.
Thanks, Doug.
Smyrna Beach. As the rule or statute is now, it would require a 2/3 of the local people in the district to approve it. Is that correct? And what's being proposed now is to change that to be 50%?
The purpose of this section here is just to have you tell us what you think. You'll get to hear some of that from the discussion that we lead from Mr. Mathan, but I think you're right on both points.
All right, on both points, okay. Well, I thought this issue, that the people in our district had already made it clear from previous meetings, the result of those meetings, that we didn't want it. And I'm a little, not upset, but not happy with the fact that now it seems that those powers that be within the city are moving the goalpost. You know, they didn't get a clear 2/3 people in favor of it. Now they're changing it to it only requires 50%, is my understanding. Well, you know, we've already made our voices clear. We made the point clear. And so it seems a little unfair to move the goalpost on us. You know, we've already been through this. And if it is 50%, if you got 50%, I'm not sure how that would work, because if you got 50% who said, yeah, we want to have a local historic district, there would be 50%. Well, then there's another 50%, let's say, theoretically, that opposes it. Now, how does that work? Is the city going to choose the 50% that they favor? 50-50, I mean, that doesn't work. You know, it seems ludicrous if that's the correct way that this is being proposed. And so I say, you know, the citizens of the district have already made it clear what their feelings are, and I kind of resent the powers that be who are trying to move the goalposts. You know what I mean? That just seems, you know, quite unfair to me. And so I think we've spoken, and I think the council should know how we feel. And that's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your comments. Are there others for public participation? Seeing none, public participation is now closed. We'll start a workshop, and as just to remind us all, there'll be no voting tonight, but it'll be an examination and perhaps getting a sense. We on the dais will get a sense of what each of us feel like after we've got the presentation from Mr. Mathan, and we'll have a conversation, but this will not be rushed to judgment tonight. This will be considered properly, and it'll come up again for a proper vote another day. In consultation with the city attorney, it would be helpful for all of us to be as forthcoming as we are and relay our feelings as each of these topics come before us. So with that as the backdrop, Senior Planner Mathan, Bob, if you come up, you'll be given 3 minutes, and sorry. Take all the time you need. We're anxious to hear what you have to say, sir.
I'd love to just take 3 minutes. You can bring mine. Okay, so we've got a little brief presentation here. I do appreciate everybody that came out. We got a nice crowd tonight, so I do appreciate that. First, I want to let you know that there are 2 different types of historic districts. There's a National Registered Historic District, and there's a local historic district. So under the current code, any property with a National Registered Historic District does not have any restrictions except for proposed demolition of one of the contributing structures in that district. A local historic district would contain contributing structures or properties that would have some type of regulations or restrictions or design criteria for new construction, exterior renovations that would face a public street. So the goal to the proposed changes to Chapter 50 is not to create new regulations or new design standards on properties in either of the 2 national registered historic districts. So what we'll do is we'll present the history of Chapter 50. We will present how proposed updates to Chapter 50, how those proposed updates may affect current properties, and then also we'll go over some of the major concerns that was from the public workshop back in December of 2023. So we'll start off with Chapter 50. So the original ordinance that was created, Chapter 50, which is a city code of ordinance, was ordinance number 13-86, so that's 1986, which was adopted by the City Commission in April of that year. This ordinance created the original framework. That ordinance created the Historic New Smyrna Beach Preservation Commission, and it provided procedures for designating historic landmarks, historic sites, and historic districts. The original ordinance was created so the city could qualify for the designation of a certified local government, or what's known as a CLG, and we were one of the 6 original governments to be certified by the state of Florida. And currently, as since August 2023, there are currently 85 CLGs in the state of Florida. So since 1986, the city has had some major accomplishments, including the National Registered New Smyrna Beach Historic District in 1990, the National Registered Coronado Historic District in 1997. The city added a property tax exemption in 2001. The city added historic building demolition in 2005. They added the archaeological preservation in 2006. We included the Turnbull Canal System as it was added to the National Register in 2007. And the city added a historic preservation grant program in 2012. So before this proposed update, the current Chapter 50 didn't clearly separate what type of districts, local or national, that would have to comply with the certificate of appropriateness requirements for any external renovations that could be seen from a public road. So between 2014 and 2020, the Planning Department enforced certificate of appropriateness regulations on contributing structures in both of the National Registered Historic Districts. Over that 7-year span, there was 117 applications that were submitted and reviewed. So in 2020, we had a citizen that challenged the enforcement of those architectural standards, enforcing both the National Registered Districts. The previous interpretation was that Chapter 50 was not clear on what type of historic district for those certificate of appropriateness should be applied to, either a national or a local. So the department did halt that practice after applying for a certificate of appropriateness for any national registered districts, and only apply that regulation to local landmarks. The planning department was then tasked to review Chapter 50 and to update and try to clarify those regulations and what should be applied to a national district and what should be applied to a local district or local landmarks. The planning department took that task on, and we hired an outside expert on historic preservation to review the proposed changes to Chapter 50. The city hired S&ME in 2021, and that consultant held a kickoff presentation to the Historic Preservation Commission in July of 2021, and then again to the City Commission in September of 2021. That consultant held 2 presentations to go over the scope of work and to try to receive any input from both the appointed officials and also the elected officials. So during the consultant's review, they found that some of the regulations found in Chapter 50 were out of date and didn't comply with some of the current Florida statutes as it pertained to the property tax section. They also expressed concerns that Chapter 50 had combined regulations for local and national districts, which made it hard to decipher. And those definitions were scattered throughout Chapter 50, and where they felt that those definitions should have been all in one place. So the planning department did receive a first draft from our consultant in November of 2021. So we'll go over some of the proposed updates to Chapter 50. Staff wanted to clarify the difference between local and national historic districts, procedures for proposed demolition applications. We want to relocate the definitions to one location. We look to increase the fine for demolition without a permit. We look to change the official name of the Historic New Smyrna Beach Preservation Commission to Historic Preservation Board, and update the property tax exemption to meet the current Florida statutes. Also change the property owner ratio from 2/3 to 50+1 for applications to be considered by the City Commission. So stated before, looking at the relocate the current and updated definitions to one location, update the name of the appointed officials, and separate the regulations for local landmarks and local historic districts. So the goal was to make any request for a local landmark or a local historic district easier to be understood, not only by staff, but also by the general public. Staff would request an update to the procedures of the certificate of appropriateness to separate a minor application and a major application. The planning department would review the minor applications like roofing, windows, siding, and door replacements, but still have the preservation board or commission review any major certificates like new construction or additions. Staff would also like to have the regulations acknowledge that the New Smyrna Beach Preservation Guidelines to be used as a tool or guide for residents who wish to meet a preservation standard with their properties, but not make these guidelines mandatory. Staff also wanted to clarify the procedures and the criteria as it pertains to building demolition applications. They increase that penalty for demolitions of contributing structures without a permit, and again, update that tax exemption so we can meet those Florida statutes. For properties that would be located in any future local historic district or any current or future local landmark, staff would want to allow for any exterior renovations to use modern materials as long as those original architectural remains consistent with the period of that structure. So this would allow for vinyl windows, shingles, metal roofs, and in some instances, tile roofing, and cement siding. This also would allow for a lower cost material as an alternative, but still meet the Florida Building Code. For new construction, the building heights, massing, and placement of location of new structure would be reviewed based on the existing neighborhood and its trend of development. The goal would be to try to keep the consistency of that neighborhood. So let's discuss how these proposed updates would affect current properties. So most of the proposed changes would only update regulations on local landmarks or local historic districts. So currently, the city does not have any local designated historic district, but we do have local landmarks. Any future local historic districts and current and future local landmarks would have to adhere to the certificate of appropriateness requirements based on any changes to a building on the facade that would face the public street. Minor changes would be reviewed by the planning department as part of a building permit application. Any major changes or new construction would be reviewed by the appointed officials. The city does have 2 National Registered Historic Districts, and the proposed update would not change the requirement of the public hearing for any demolition of a contributing structure in either one of those National Historic Districts. So there was some major concerns that was brought up during the public workshop. One, there was a strong recommendation from the public workshop that included not to amend the required 2/3 support of a property owner to create a local historic district, where the actual amendment was proposing the 50% plus one. Also, they brought up they didn't want to increase the existing fine of $5,000 to $25,000 for a property owner that demolishes a contributing structure without a permit. And three, they removed the current regulation that required contributing structures in a national historic district to be reviewed at a public hearing by the Historic Preservation Commission or board. So for more information about historic preservation of the city or past local history of the city, you can access the city's website, which is cityofnsb.com. You can select government, then you can select planning, and then you can select the tab name historic preservation. Also, for more information about proposed changes to Chapter 50, you can also accept that city's website, cityofnsb.com, select government, select Chapter 50 preservation update, and then you'll find different links for videos and documents, including the consultants' kickoff meetings, photos of contributing structures, and also documents. And so that would conclude the presentation, and we're open to any questions that the commission may have.
Any questions from any commissioner for Mr. Mathan?
One real quick.
Yes, go right ahead, Mr. McGurk.
The statement was made that we have about 500 homes in the National Historic District. Is that about accurate?
That's about accurate,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Okay,
go.
there we go. So I wrote down some of the questions from the past meetings, and we had a past HPC board member ask this question. And so I wanted to bring it up and ask Bob this, and it has to do with the history of actually the maps and the homes that are in and decided on how they were chosen to be in the National Historic District. Because today, if you look, or this week, there was a Facebook website stating that the city supports property tax exemptions, preservation grants, and other historic incentives. But in 1986, which was probably before a lot of us up here, the original Chapter 50 National Register, the historic districts then had many issues. Some of our oldest homes, example on the west side and other areas, I've been told we actually have 800 historic homes. They were purposely excluded in these two national historic map districts. Therefore, this person stated that gerrymandering occurred when these maps were developed, causing major city problems, thus stating that the city supports these exemptions and grants, but do they actually support this? Those homes were totally excluded. It was never actually intended for all national historic homes in our city. These incentives, exemptions, grants, tax credits are not only biased because most of the population are totally excluded from these incentives, even if we had incentives. Also, currently, the only national tax credits that are offered to homes are those that were stopped from being torn down, and the qualifying criteria is not easily obtainable at all. So I have a problem all the way back with the history. The other thing is the contributing structures. But I have questions on that, but I'd like you to answer about the maps and why 300 homes were excluded.
Okay, well, the original survey did include properties on both sides of US 1. We have tried to create a local or national district west of US 1. We tried that 2 different times. We attempted that in 2011, and we attempted that again in 2018. The problem we were having with a lot of the west side properties, we didn't have support, and the people that we did have support found out they didn't actually own the homes they were living in, that their homes had never been through probate, and their grandparents owned the house that they actually lived in. And so when you don't have a owner that's living, we can't count that as a positive vote. So we've tried twice, and we failed both attempts because we could not reach a significant number to be able to create a district for that area of town.
Just to follow up, if you don't mind, Bob, any history in any of your records about the accusation of gerrymandering in 86 or so, where there was some exclusion for some properties for one reason or another, have you been able to find out or validate any of that?
Well, the first attempt was in 1990. That was the first attempt that we did a National Historic District, which covers from Ronick Lane down to Lytle Avenue, from US 1 to Riverside Drive. I wasn't here in 1990, but that probably was the biggest amount of the city that wanted to be in some type of designation. Again, in 1997, we got the beachside involved, and they did a national district there. That district's a lot smaller. I wasn't here in 1997 either, but I'm sure that there was probably folks that didn't want to be part of it, so they tried to make it as compact as possible to make a district where you had the most amount of contributing structures from property owners that wanted to be into a national district.
Thanks for that clarity.
Okay,
And,
this lead,
Just a clarification, that it requires neighborhood buy-in to be in a national, and it requires neighborhood buy-in to be in a local historic district? So I'm just checking.
Right, correct. So you have to have buy-in in both. The difference is if you want to have a national district, the national standard is you only need 50% plus one support to be in a national district. Or for a local district, our regulation currently says you have to have 2/3 support of those property owners that would be in that district. So a little tougher to make a local district, but then a local district has more restrictions. And so that's why that probably was at 2/3 when they originally put that in the code, where the state's code is 50 plus one. But whatever we take as a potential national districts, we're going to bring in front of this body. And so I would not want to bring an application where I've got 49% or 50% of the property owners standing behind me saying, I do not want to be in a district. We would vent that ahead of time so that we could hopefully come up with a district where a majority of folks would want to be into that local or national district.
we'll go down the row for each person to ask a question. Commissioner Perrine, any more?
oh, I have several, please, for Bob.
Okay, all good questions for his presentation. Yeah, sure.
So to add to that National Historic District, to have those, the contributing structures were over 117 or over 100. Were those people asked to sign off on being included as a contributing structure? Were they actually able to have a voice in that, notarize and state that they wanted to be a contributing structure or not?
I can't speak for 1997 or 1990, but in today's standard, yes. If somebody wanted to put an application together to have a local district in their neighborhood, we'd be wanting support, and they had to be notarized support. If somebody did not want to be in part of it, we'd have them notarize a statement that says, I don't want to be part of it. So that way, when we do bring this application, or if we had an application to bring forward, we want to bring a positive application. We don't want to bring an application that would bring negativity to the commission.
These contributing structures, those, as you stated, have to go through the HPC board if they're contributing structure to the National Historic District, and they were required to have certificates of appropriateness, which were unlawful for a lot of years. And then this was found, since we don't have a certified local, that was stopped. But for a lot of years, that was done inappropriately by our city, correct?
I wouldn't use the word unlawfulness or done incorrectly. I'd say the current Chapter 50 did not distinguish between a national and a local district. So at that time, we imposed what the code said was if you was in a historic district and you were a contributing structure, you had to go through the certificate of appropriateness process. It was in 2020 when somebody asked about that, we decided to stop that procedure until we could get Chapter 50 updated to actually specify which districts, locals or national, would have to go through that certificate of appropriateness process.
So a person currently, if they're considered a contributing structure, walk me through what has to be done with that home if they want to make any kind of remodeling on it now, since we don't have a local overlay.
In a local district or a national district?
Well, I don't think we have a choice. The contributing structure to those national districts of the 500 homes that are in there that were not accurate on our maps to begin with. But you've allocated 117 homes or more for contributing structures that, to my knowledge, were never approved by the homeowners, nor never disclosed when the homes were sold that they're a contributing structure.
Okay. So at the state level, if you want to create a national district, they don't actually require support from the property owners to submit an application at the national level. If you have 50 or less properties, they will send a letter to each one of the property owners that are listed on that application to let them know, be aware that they have been listed on a possible national application, and if they would prefer not to be on it, they'd have to sign a notarized statement and send it to the state. If it's over 50, the state of Florida only puts an ad in the local newspaper, because the state does not put restrictions on any national districts or any contributing structures in national districts.
So the HPC no longer approves the contributing structures for the certificate of appropriateness, correct?
They do not review any applications for certificate of appropriateness unless it is attached to a local landmark.
But they do if for the demolishing.
They do currently. If you want to demolish a contributing structure in the national district, then they would have to review that application.
So I have 11 that were approved that I pulled from public record, and I have quite lengthy of what these individuals had to go through. And in our last meeting, this was brought up that even though these actually went to the from the HPC, they got denied, but they were approved from the City Commission. I have 17 pages of all of the conditions that they had to meet to be able to do this for these contributing structures in a National Historic District that shouldn't have been done the way it was in 1986, excluding and including different people of the city to begin with.
I don't understand. We didn't exclude anybody in 1986. 1986 was the first frame of ordinance that could allow anybody in the city to want to create some type of national districts or local landmarks. It wasn't until 1990 when the city decided to actually create its first national historic district. So before that 1990, there was no gerrymandering. It was just basically we tried to come up with a district where we had enough support from property owners, and they submitted that. It came in front of this body, and then from this body it went to the state, and from the state it went to the federal government, and it was accepted. And so that's why that district was created. I don't know who is making the statement, Jerry Ringham, but I was not here then, so I really can't answer that question. But I don't think it was based on, if you look at the map, most of all those properties were contributing in there. There was a few that was outside that, so I'm not sure why they were not included. Maybe it was because they wasn't adjacent to some of the other properties that were, or maybe they might have decided they wanted to be left out of the application, and so staff back at that time did not include them into the district. But then again, I wasn't here in 1990, and our records are very limited of what we could find.
The letters that were sent out to get the 50 plus 1 or 2/3 vote, whichever percent you guys want to look at, to the homeowners multiple times, those had issues, according to our attorney Shea, that how they were worded each time they were sent out, they were very misleading and very confusing to begin with. And with those...
I don't think they were very confused at all. I think what we did was we put mailers out to people that were in this national district just to see if there was any support of trying to create a local district out of the boundaries that we currently had that was a national district. We have all the paperwork, we have all the records from the private companies that evaluated each one of those properties. So if we were going to try to create a local district, we figured, well, maybe we should start with our national districts that we currently have and then see if there's, if there's people out there. We did get support, but we did not get enough support. And yes, every 6 months, we did send out letters. And the reason why we were doing letters, because that was a period of COVID, and we couldn't have a lot of meetings during that time. So we were not allowed to have neighborhood meetings. So what we did was we did the second best thing, and we mailed out 500 or 600 letters every 6 months to see if anybody was wanting to mail them back or drop them by the office, email them support. And every time we did it, we get a little bit more, but after a year and a half, we didn't have even 50% of support. So at that point, the initiative was dropped.
Point of clarification, did you get guidance from the city attorney's office on the wording in those letters?
The letters was created by the assistant city manager at the time, and so we followed his direction.
Got it. And is it your practice to normally get guidance from our legal department, Bob?
For me as a staff member, I take guidance from my superiors. They normally would be the one that would go to the attorneys. I mean, we do communicate with the city attorney's office, but our level, I would move that to our supervisor's role and then have that dialogue between them.
Thank you, yes, sir.
I hate to interrupt. I just need some clarification real quick on one issue. For the National Historic Districts that do exist, did we at least hit the minimum of the 50% plus one to go ahead and implement that district? And do we have documentation to prove it?
I don't have documentation at that point.
Okay.
But at that time, when it was sent to the state did what their notification process was at the time. Currently, it would be newspaper. I'm not sure what it was back in 1990 or 1997, but whatever support that was there, they felt the documentation was order. They submitted it to the Department of Interior. They stamped approval on it, and the district was created.
Okay, but there's no documentation that the city got 50 plus 1% of the vote of the property owners to do the,
I couldn't tell you if we have documentation for that.
and that's all I'm wondering. Thank you.
Any more questions, ma'am?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Martin?
I'm having some difficulty trying to decide what it is we're trying to decide tonight, actually. What I do know is that New Smyrna Beach is arguably the oldest city in the U.S., and yes, we all know St. Augustine has taken that title. And so I do feel a responsibility to being a part of that history. I am aware that a lot of what we're discussing is really facade, meaning we're really, one could almost make the analogy of a movie set. We're not asking that anybody use 1900 plumbing. So there's that aspect of it, that so much of what we're discussing is facade, although a lot of discussion gets about demolition and where these different structures are. So I'm still having difficulty understanding what the biggest problems are. I am
Not to interrupt, we're going to all have a time to do our discussion. If you have any questions for him, we'll do that, and then we'll go back to what our opinions are. So if you have any questions for the city planner, let's get those out of the way, get those laid flat, and then every one of us will go through our standing and how we feel about that. I want to absolutely hear yours. I don't want to let Bob stand there and listen to us go on. If we can ask him a question and he can answer it, I know he'll do to the best of his ability. If not, he'll sit down. Any questions, or do you want me to come back to you?
Well, I mean, I have a number of questions. Okay. If I look at paragraph 50-3, we're talking about locally designated. I have a lot of concerns that we don't have real clarification throughout this document on local versus national, and I don't know how in this context to clarify, each specific one. So I think that perhaps, and the rest are philosophical.
Have you got advice there, Bob? We look to you for professional advice. So,
Yes,
in
sir.
all candor and seriousness, if you've got an idea, I think the commissioner would love to hear it.
Yes, sir. So as we look through the entire document, because it is a pretty large document, it's a very, very large undertaking to go through this. And if anybody's read through it, you can tell it's 30-some pages long, so it's a large undertaking. So the National Register has their own rules. So if you want to be a national district.
Okay, wait, I understand that.
Right.
When we use the term locally designated, does locally designated have any national registry requirements?
No, a locally designated would either be a
thank
local
you.
landmark or a local district.
Okay. The requirements to be in a local historic district are different from a national historic district, true?
There are different rules, but then some of the parallel would be the same. So the way of us trying to evaluate a property would be the same, local or national. The only difference is local would have our local rules or regulations on the property, where the national does not put any
Okay,
rules.
so local does another layer of restrictions over the national. Okay. Does a local landmark have to be in a local and/or national historic district?
No, the local landmark can be located anywhere in the city.
Thank you. Does the ownership status, what's the ownership status of any archaeological artifacts found on private property?
Okay, so if they are artifacts found on private property, it's owned by the property owner itself.
Thank you.
The only time that would change is if human remains are found.
Thank
So
you.
there's a different procedure if there's human remains that are found.
Are there any protection for local landmarks not in a historic district? I think of Canova Grave and Detweiler Cemetery.
Right. So the good news is that grave is listed as a local landmark, so it does have some local protection. So if there was going to be something done to
Well,
that.
my question is it's a local landmark, but it's not in a National Historic District. So it has standalone protection, is what I'm asking.
Correct. It has bodies that review whatever changes that we want to do to that local landmark.
Thank you. And we'll come back. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner McGurk.
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Hartman.
Bob, thanks for all the time that you've put in on this. We currently have a waiting period now for demolition. Where does that come from?
So to be a certified local government, you have to have some provisions if you're going to have a demolition provision in your code. And so the state requires you, if you're going to have a demolition provision, then you have to have a demolition delay provision as well. And what that happens is if the Historic Preservation Commission at that time does not vote in favor for the demolition of the structure, the demolition delay right now is a 120-day period. And what it does, it gives you a list of items for them to do. One is to try to advertise that structure, see if there's somebody else out there that would like to relocate that structure to another property, either by buy-in or for free. And they advertise that. So that's really the biggest thing. Or if there's any grant opportunities, they can seek to see if there's a grant opportunity to help do some work and bring that structure back. But after the 120 days, if none of that's moved to prohibition, then the Historic Preservation is supposed to vote in favor of demoling the property. If I can't get a favorable vote from that body, then the next step is an appeal of that decision to the elected officials. And we've had to do that, as they stated, twice.
So then who actually sets the 120 days?
Correct. Currently, right now, we would impose a 120-day delay.
Who came up with that number?
Well, it could actually be less. 120 days is what was used, but the state will allow you to use any period of time if you want to be 30, 60, 90.
Okay.
But I think the 120 days was thinking the time that somebody would need to try to advertise a property and maybe receive maybe some bids or some people contact them, give them a period of time to work that all out. So,
Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you so much. Bob, is it your opinion that there are three major points of not contention, but either opportunities or challenges here, or determinations that we will vote on at a separate time, but discuss coming up? And if I boil it down too fine, you feel free to correct me and say, nope, there's more to it than that. Yes, there might be some punctuation and from some puppy to small dog comments to change that, but the meat of it is the fines being either increased or decreased or left the same, the demolition delay or plus or minus whatever the number is, and the question of the current 2/3 vote by the locals in that area, or 50+1. Yeah. Have I missed any of the higher points?
no, sir. Based on what we heard, that was the three top areas of concern by the citizens back in the December's public workshop. I'm sure there was a few others, but that seemed to be the big three that was being talked about.
Very good. Any other questions for Vice Mayor? Go right ahead.
So this relates back to a couple of things the citizens spoke out at our last public workshop, I think in December. And they were, I believe, one of the people they're in the audience, and it had to do with a couple of different properties. One of them, I'm going to pull. It's for this was declined approval. It was 114 Florida Avenue, and this was denied for demolition. And I have all of these pages of the problems that came with that and what the HPC said and what the homeowner tried to plead that they wanted to demolish, and because there was all kinds of structural issues to this property, and it got delayed a long time, and it got kicked back to the city commission. And the other one was to demolish the detached garage because they called it a contributing structure. Is that normal?
So I do remember that case because I was assigned to that case. Staff felt that the building had deteriorated to the point that it could not be saved. The applicant had a structural engineer's report that stated the same. It had plenty of pictures. So staff recommended approval for that demolition for that period of time. We could not get enough votes from HPC to approve that demolition. And we sit, as staff, we sit down with all applicants prior to an application. We have pre-application meetings. We usually sit with them before we have an actual meeting itself. In this case, that happened. And then after the application was denied, we sit down with them again and plotted a course for them, which was to come to the city commission. And they hired legal counsel to take that application here. Staff was still in support. And so the commission at that time overruled the decision by the Historic Preservation Commission, and they followed the recommendation by staff. And so that house was approved, and then it also was demoed. The detached garage that was part of it was not part of that application. It was not required to have a certificate of appropriateness because it was built in the 1960s. It was a large hollow concrete block building, so it wasn't even the half block that was used in the 50s, so it definitely was in the 60s, being the large block like they build houses today. So there was, that was approved to be removed, and actually the good news is they actually found a shell mitten that was hidden behind there, so we actually was able to document on the state register that there was a shell mitten that was hidden behind there when shell mittens were actually created by the indigenous Native Americans that lived here. Just like most of the ones on Riverside Drive, all those elevated, including our old Fort Park. So they're full of oyster shells and things like that.
Do you know what the costs are for these archaeological requests and conditions that are put on these homeowners?
Well, anytime there's an archaeological monitor, the property owner, if they don't want to do that, they can appeal that to this body. But the ones that did it, we normally would give them the museum, because at the time they had archaeologists that were working for the museum. Dot Moore was probably the main one that was over there, and so normally they would do it for donations for the museum. If they were not available, or sometimes they had students that would help out that were going to school to be an archaeologist. If that could not happen, then we would give them the 3 contacts that we use for archaeological studies, but they could pick any individual they wanted to. So there are a couple that are local here. I'm not sure what the cost of that is, but it easily could run into a few $1,000s.
If you refer to page 16 in the handout that I gave on all the demolishing, I'm going to go back to this detached garage that another application was submitting as a contributing structure to the National Historic. This was 110 Florida Avenue. Actually, the applicant was 540 Wayne Avenue. So the commission voted this to not be demolished, and then the homeowner had to go in, and you guys recommended a certain kind of style of windows and a better choice of a style of doors for this detached garage. Do you remember that?
I do remember we had a case that was across the street from this property that was doing the demolition. They ended up saving that garage and actually building a second story to it. So we went and sit down with that property owner and went over a bunch of different styles of doors and windows and siding and different materials. And based on the list that we gave them, they chose what they would like to use. And so we used that choice whenever we took it to the Historic Preservation Commission for approval.
And then on page 11, the problem I have with this whole thing, with your demolition delays and the requirements and all the conditions, this one has 2 pages of conditions that were required on this homeowner. And here's multiple times through this, and this is opposite of what was said in the last meeting. It says staff is always reluctant to recommend approval to demolish a structure that is a contributing structure in one of our 2 National Historic Districts. That bothers me.
So, yeah, so we pretty much probably have recommended approval for every one of those applications to be demoed, but our recommendation is normally supplied by a report by a structural engineer, and as an individual, you can look at a report and you can say, you know, this structure is beyond repair, or it's beyond the value of repairing it. I'm not a structural engineer, so I can't make that determination, but I can read a report. And so they have an engineer that supplies that report. Sometimes it's an architect that supplies that report. And based on the findings of that professional, if they feel that it can't be rebuilt, I can read their report. And so normally we would recommend approval based on that professional's report.
So in these 17 pages, despite their structural engineers that are saying this is not structurally sound, the HPC board multiple times still denied the request to demolish the building. Then they had to go through 120 days. If that's not government overreach, I don't know what is.
Well, one of them was requested that. One of our applications, which was on Douglas Street, I believe, they requested a 120-day stay after they could not get a favorable vote. And after the 120 days was up and they showed that they tried to advertise it and try to see if somebody else wanted to buy it, the commission at that time approved that demolition permit. So the 120-day stay, we make up the date, but we have to have a demolition of delay based on the requirements to be a certified local government. Now, if we choose it to be less than 120, this body can choose a lesser time. If you want 90 or 60, 30, but we feel that you need to have time to be able to advertise that property. We have had structures in the past get relocated, so it's not something that happens every time, but there's been a few that have been relocated over time.
Any other questions for Mr. Mathan? Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for all your questions.
If you stay in the room, I'm sure we're going to come back to you, Bob.
I'm not leaving.
All right, very good. So perhaps the city attorney will be instructive in how you, having prepared for it and read this yourself, is it your opinion that if we go through and offer each of our ideas, that would be fine, but hearing from you always sets our mind at ease to make sure the bumpers are up, we're not stepping outside our bounds.
So a lot of the content, the substance, is existing language that has just been reorganized. However, I think the big 3 topics that Mr. Mathan pointed out, the consent percentage requirement, the fine related to demolitions, and the time for a demolition delay, those are things that staff would need direction from the commission on, you know, where you all stand on those big issues.
Thanks, that's helpful. Why don't we start with the 2 guys that didn't get the black and white memo. Congratulations, teammates. 3 of us got the black and white memo. You guys got the brown memo. That's fine. We'll start with Commissioner Hartman.
So I'm in favor of the rewrite in that it's now a legible document, something that's readable. You know, staff's done a great job on kind of giving you the definitions up front and then laying it out in a format that's anybody out here in the room could read it and go through with it. I'm of the opinion that we need to keep the 2/3 vote and the voting part of it. Would be in favor of increasing the fines for non-permitted demolition, and I'm still undecided about the number of days that the demolition may take. Bob made a very good point in that if somebody's trying to save a structure or somebody wants to donate it, it's going to take some time. And so there's a lot of processes to go through in order to do that. And by no means do we act quickly on anything. So is that what you were looking for?
Yeah,
okay.
That's helpful. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Commissioner Martin.
Well, I must say, I didn't realize that the workshop about historic preservation was about penalties. I thought it might actually approach something like, what do we want to preserve and how can we do it? I thought perhaps we would look at, this is what we want to accomplish, now what's the best way to do it? And I have problems with the punitive nature of all of this. So I don't like the onerous nature of our documents. I don't like the financial implications. I am concerned that somebody can purchase property in historic district without prior knowledge. I'd prefer a way to help people preserve. Oops, or maybe you wanted to buy a property in the historic district. Welcome to New Smyrna. Now let's help you keep it in this particular condition. And one of the interesting things I find is that we use the term historic as if we all know what it means. It's not all 1930, it's not all 1870. Properties change. How do we help them evolve? The chances are, if you have a property that is 100 years old, it does not look the way it was built 100 years ago. Somebody has added something on, they've made changes. So at what point in time do we say, this is the building that you are to preserve going forward? But how do we know how to attack it if we don't know what it is we're trying to preserve? And that's an issue for me. And I would prefer a positive approach rather than everything being onerous and expensive. And surprised you didn't know that you bought into onerous and expensive, but you did.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate that. Mr. McGurk.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is a workshop, and this is not supposed to be formal. It's supposed to be something where we could speak freely and talk openly. So I have a lot of thoughts on this. It's a difficult, what do you do? How do you force as government people with their private properties? How do you make them do something? And that's difficult. So there's some points I want to get across, and I have a number of things that I want to say in both. I also want to respond to some of the things that I heard in public participation. First and foremost, historic preservation should not be a bad thing. It should not be a penalty, and it certainly shouldn't be scary. Government should make the process enjoyable and facilitate that process so it's easy for people who want to do it. It should be a proud moment in a property owner's time that they did something for historic preservation. It was something they wanted to do. The most important thing is not to penalize, but give the carrot. A lot of people have said that. I agree with that. But we're not set up like that. It's all penalty. Do this or this happens. Do this or this happens. The fascinating thing about the two or three public workshops we have is I have heard an overwhelming support of people who own the historic property say, do not do this to me. I have a disproportionate number of people who don't own historic properties who say, no, make them do this or do that. I have a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for the people who own historic properties and have gone through that process and dealt with it. That's awesome. I like to listen to them because I think that they've gone through it and experienced what has happened. This document, chapter 50, when I read the intent and purpose, which is the very beginning of it, it reads fantastic. It's great. It feels really good. But the one thing that was very clear to me is that was from a public policy, public ownership perspective. When I looked at that as as a private person, whether it was my home or my business, it made almost no sense. So there has to be a distinguishing feature between public lands and private property when we have this discussion on historic preservation. That to me is one of the first and most important things that we need to start discussing, is spreading that out, breaking those two apart. The intent and purpose of Chapter 50 explains perfectly why we should be rebuilding the Women's Club. Perfectly. It's a shame that that has gotten derailed. So I asked myself this question: what is the reason why so many historic properties have either been demolished or been in disrepair? We need to identify a problem, and I think we all too often identify the symptom, and we act like the symptom is the problem. And it was interesting that we did a national district on the east side of the railroad tracks, but not on the west side. I suspect that has a lot to do with economics, which will also suggest maybe why a lot of historic properties east of the railroad tracks have also been in disrepair, been torn down. The cost of maintaining these structures is incredible. The cost and time, we all heard time is money. Well, what do you mean time is money? When you have to spend a year or 2 years going through the planning process, whether it's development services, the planner who you're getting along with, and you even want to work on a historic property, the time it takes for even someone who wants to work on a historic property is a lot. And it's expensive. So when you get on the private sector of that, and you're trying to line up your contractor, your financing, it's all takes time and money. So I think we need to have some discussion on problem versus symptom. A voter referendum on the issue, that was brought up. We've never gotten more than 35% of the people who buy into a national or local district. And I think that was with the city properties included, which I think need to be removed. I'm not so sure a voter referendum to use the taxpayers' dollars to fund private homes or businesses is going to go well. That's just my opinion of it. That's my thoughts. We could try that. Maybe it's a good idea. I'm not sure. But knowing this town, taxpayer money to private individuals and with some sort of voter referendum may be a big challenge. And I wouldn't want that to be misinterpreted and do more damage. Because I think that historic preservation is very, very important. And we need to find a way to make it easier and to make it financially feasible. I have heard time and time again people tell me that there's funds, that there's grant money. I have a couple friends who have invested at least a few $1 million in historic properties in this town. And there was really nothing for them. Nothing. So I've told everybody, even my staff I've warned, don't come up and say that there's grant money, because I'm going to challenge you on where's the money, exactly how much, and how do we get it, and who gets it. So I think what we need to do in the spirit of it is, what can New Smyrna do to promote historic preservation? That has to be a big part of this discussion. What we're going to accomplish tonight, Lisa, you're right. I looked at this document. I made some calls this afternoon, and I said, I'm only 8 pages into it, and I have marked up every page with probably 10 or 15 different markings. It's an important document. And one thing I want to make clear is it keeps referring to the commission. We need to change that, because most people, even most people at home listening, When Valley references page 11, it says the commission voted. I would think it would be the city commission. So there's a lot of important things in this document that we need to get through. You know, it's interesting. How many people bought properties in the National Historic District and there was no seller's disclosure that the property was in the National Historic District? That's a big deal. And I would recommend that the city require a seller's disclosure anytime a property is encumbered by any sort of historic district, whether it's national and maybe some local that we may be able to get in the future. And by the way, I think we can get local historic districts in the future. I think there's a way to do that. The challenge with historic properties, I think, goes down to money. Everything from construction to permitting to time it takes for approvals. And then you have the insurance. You have property and casualty. You have flood insurance. Then you have the properties that are going to be below the base flood elevation. I promise you, a lot of the historic properties on the west side are way below the base flood elevation. So they're going to need to be either dramatically raised up or they're going to have to be torn down. Because we all know where the National Flood Insurance Program and what FEMA wants it done. All structures below the base flood elevation have to be either raised or demolished. None of this historic preservation deals with any of that, and so that's a big problem too. So this is a big issue. On the 3, let me go back to these notes here. I want to make sure I get the 3 ones correct. Okay, demolition 120 days, penalty of $5,000 to $25,000, and the percentage to establish a local district. So I will tell you that theoretically, I have no problem with 120 days or a $25,000 demolition penalty if that homeowner specifically has agreed to be in a district and those terms were part of the agreement. I have no problem with that. It has nothing to do with me. The homeowner independently agreed to be in a district. So we go back to now, what about this 50 plus 1 to 2/3, which is roughly 66%? I'm gonna struggle with forcing anybody into a district that encumbers their property, that doesn't want to be. And I think that is probably, aside from finding financial help for people who want to put their house in a historic, or, the financial help for people who want grant money to help revitalize and rebuild historic properties is one of the top issues we need to do. And then the second issue is we need to determine who wants to be in it and let's get them in. Because we're trying to figure out we're hearing from people who don't want to be in it. It's great. I'm not inclined to force you into it. So I certainly am not going to be interested in lowering that threshold. If anything, I have an interest in increasing that threshold or removing it altogether and simply just saying people who want to be in a district can be in it and people who don't. And I believe even with that threshold removed, we can create local historic districts for the people who want to be in it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Mr. Pruitt, thank you. Please hold it. Thank you. Thank you for saying it. Commissioner Perrine.
Thank you. Something was mentioned why a lot of these were torn down. From what I can find, I've gotten all the way back from 2008 of the applications that have requested for demolishing, and there's not that many. And when they were, it was mostly due to termites. The structure was weakened because of hurricanes and just not maintaining the buildings as mentioned. And if you look at the Women's Club, the city shouldn't be in the business maintaining historic properties. It's just not what the taxpayers want. Once that's come out loud and clear, and we shouldn't attempt that. That should have been put in a preservation society. The the HPC board, maybe a preservation fund to manage that building, but neglect doesn't do well for these old buildings, and we keep seeing this over and over. These buildings aren't like in Europe that were built to last thousands of years. These buildings just aren't built that way. A lot of them are made out of wood structures, and they don't last. So I have a big problem with our national district maps. I like that we would offer incentives of some sort to not tear down a building versus the stick punishing people that has been done in the past and making them hire attorneys, making them hire archaeologists. I just had a person off of Canal Street lose 2 deals they told me about, several $1 million deals, because in due diligence, the new buyers found out that this was going on and has been going on, and they didn't want any part of it. And you know, he has to disclose that. When I purchased my home, I put it in a trust. I live in a 1938, and I put that no one could sell it. My kids could rent it. I wanted to protect this. I did this on my own. It was voluntary. But after going through what I've gone through, my house is on the market because I'm just sick of it. I'm sick to death of what's been going on and this continuing to come at us. I did receive 3 letters, I think, from the city as soon as I moved in, and what a shock that was. The first one says, if you don't want to be included in a local overlay, then do nothing. So I did nothing. We didn't show up because we didn't want it. And then it changed the stance one way or another, and it restated it in a different way. And it's like, why am I getting this again? You know, why is this continually coming at us when clearly the property owners feel like they have rights? They don't want to be told that they can do this or can't do that by other people in the city that don't even live in a historic home. End of story. That's been shown multiple times. So how do you go about giving incentives to people that were totally excluded because what was set up here was they don't have deeds to their house? Well, you can't assume that with every person on the West District or wherever they live. If there's an older home, some of our oldest homes are off of Dust and Mary, and they're totally excluded from these maps. I don't understand that. You open it up to the whole entire city if you're going to offer incentives. And you don't punish people for wanting to demolish a dilapidated house that has structural issues and termite infested. And that's what's happened from these 17 pages over and over. Certain people on the board have questioned specialists saying the house needs to be demolished. I don't understand that. Just because you've renovated a house, you think you know more than a structural engineer? That makes no sense to me. I understand why these people are so upset. So I went back through, we had 40 emails on the ZT8-22 height restriction and lot assemblage, and it was people opposing all of these. That was a separate case, but some of them got combined with the Chapter 50. So I pulled out the Chapter 50 emails, and I have them right here, specifically talking about demolition. This individual that owns a historic home says the current waiting time required for permits on building in the National Historic Register is already excessive, and the increase in waiting time could mean the loss of a total value of some properties. Therefore, they want to be done away with this length of time. Over and over, I heard people stand up saying the 120 days is overkill. That isn't anything necessary ever to have a CLG status. I don't know why it's 120 days, but all of this time we're very lucky that we haven't had lawsuits. because the two people that have come forward to complain to me off the canal have had to jump through hoops with attorney fees, archaeologists, and for what reason? Because a garage was falling down, or an old building was termite infested and there were homeless people living in that building. You don't want to move a building like that, trust me. Makes no sense. So I think we need to use common sense here, and if we want to offer some kind of incentive for people not to tear down a house, then we open it up to the entire city and not a group. I have a major problem with my house being considered a structural home that supporting structure, because I was never notified that I was purchasing a house like that, and it was not a disclosure. So before we go any further, I think all homes in the National District that are supporting structures must be told to their buyers that they are in a National Historic area, because if not, they're going to go through what I've been going through, which has been a total nightmare. And the lady that stood up that said, "What do you fear?" She's my neighbor and she lives in a brand new house. She doesn't have to fear the insurance being canceled. That we have letters from several insurance companies saying, if you're even considering being in a local overlay, cities are canceling. Cities are having insurance canceled them constantly. And we already have a state in a national epidemic with insurance companies and rates going up. So with that, I highly doubt anybody would ever want to be voluntarily put in a local overlay. If they do, that's fine. You can do it at 100% is what that vote should be. If somebody wants it, they need to notarize it and say, I want it. But good luck with getting insurance, because we have proof of that by multiple carriers that they will not insure at a regular rate any home that is in a local overlay. So with that, for the voting percent, it needs to be 100%, not 66, not 50 plus 1. It should be totally voluntary, and that person should sign off and also have it notarized, because anything else, you're taking the rights away. Because I tell you what, you force any local overlay on any of these people, and it's not 100% voluntary, and they have their insurance canceled, and they can't sell their house because they have to disclose this nonsense on their sale of their home, and they can't sell it because of that, then there's going to be a lawsuit and property takings, and guess who pays for that? You property tax owners, because it'll be a lawsuit to the city. I don't want that burden, and neither should you. As for the demolition, 120 days is way too long. Unless it's like Commissioner McGurk said, somebody that wants 100% voluntary and they're already in that, then charge them whatever you want to charge them, because they voluntarily put their home in that. But think about this. What if something changes and, this is for demolishing that are going against non-approvals. But when you have it so crazy to have to approve it with all of these pages and pages of conditions, who would even want to do that? I'd rather just go pay the fine, the $5,000 fine. Who's going to go through all this? It makes no sense. And same with the fine. It's irrelevant. If somebody wants to volunteer and put their house in it, then so be it. They can pay the fine they want, but who's going to want to? You're punishing the people that don't have money. Is what you're doing. Only the wealthy will be able to afford to do anything like that.
Thank you, ma'am. And I know there's some follow-ups I want to go, but I'll get, okay. Order, please. Order. Thank you. Appreciate that. Know where you stand. We'll have follow-up. I'll get some words in, and then we'll have follow-up, and then we'll go to the city manager and city attorney for some guidance. I want to thank the commission and the crowd for the civility with which we conduct ourselves in what seems to be some of the most serious matters. This seems so dire and serious, and yet it, as Commissioner McGurk said, it should be a joyful thing. And you can tell by Commissioner Perrine's remarks that have affected her personally, there's nothing joyous about some of what she's been through. So hats off to us. If you haven't seen other cities' commission meetings or workshops, go to one. You'll appreciate what you've got in the city of New Smyrna. Just go to one, and I assure you, it doesn't matter where you go. The civility, as Mayor Owen once said, is one of the most valuable things we have here. I listened to the people, and those of you that came out, those of you who stood and made remarks, I'm grateful for that. I stand in favor of a potential for not only our privately held homes, but our public, but our commercial structures, which represent a lot of the attraction to our town. So I think you heard Mr. Pendergast stand up and say that. I think that that would be a great direction for the staff to head in that regard. It's okay for us to be emotional. I don't make it. I'm a science and logic guy, but I'm also emotional about a lot of things. So lest you think it's not okay to get emotional about something you feel passionate about, you're hearing it up here, and I know you feel it in the seats that you're in. That's okay. But when we call a shot or make a decision, let us be able to live with that after the emotion fades or after another perspective is offered. And so the technique that I try to use is math, logic, and science to get there. And that usually holds up for a long, long time. So that's why we don't rush. You heard Commissioner Hartman joke about, hey, we don't do anything fast up here. Well, you ought to be thankful for it. I've seen other organizations that are not governmental rush and have to do it twice. Measure twice, cut once, you know what I mean? I like I think both sides have talked about the punitive nature, which is not what we're trying to do here. That is, part of government is to set up penalties. But in this regard, I would think that what we would like to do is set up incentives to do the right thing. Incentives to make what you found attractive about this town to stay here or to come here even more so. To that end, what have we got? What are those tools that we have in our midst to use? It's not much. It's usually money. What kind of money? It's the tax money. There's a couple ways to look at that. If I buy a house that's across the street from Mr. McGurk's charming cottage of historic nature, it will raise the value for my property because I'm going to build a 3-story monolith, but I will have benefited, and all the neighbors will have benefited by every other structure that's in that neighborhood because that's what attracted me here in the first place. So I think that it's not just rewarding those who actually do it, but all of us stand to benefit because that's what this town is. That's what it has been. And so are the other towns that were listed in Mr. Mathan's presentation of why they are still so attractive. So it's not rewarding that person, it's making them, it's compensating them for the hassle, the anguish, the discovery on the fly that you didn't know that's maybe 50 years old. It's making their burden lighter. On the surface, it sounds like, wow, what a deal. Today, the law is written that says on anything you improve, we're going to give you a discount. I don't think it goes far enough because I bought a pig and a poke. I said, I'm going to figure out what's in this house, and I'm going to live with the consequences. So if I could cut a tax burden, meanwhile, all my neighbors are getting their boats floated as well because my charming home is what makes the value so high, I think that's reasonable. I think that's worthy. So incentives, not penalties. The last piece is the grants. I know there are grants out there. I know we participate in those, but to what extent? I know that we've had some that have tried and bought property, and the grant process was either so onerous or evaporated, or there was no funding. We could not get there. The only sure way is to make, in my view, is to make a tax incentive. And that covers the whole property, not just the accoutrements that on either reconstruction or improvement. Lastly, what is a historical home? I have one that was built in 2000. In 2120, nearly 100 years from now, my home is probably going to be a historic home. So it's a moving scale. For those of us that are here, it means something that was 19 in front of the name or 18 in front of the name. But for those that follow and sit where you and I are right now, it probably means the homes that we're in. Valley points out widely, if it lasts that long. And none of them are the same, as Commissioner Martin points out. None of them have their porches closed in or have a structure added on or what have you. But it's still got some historic roots to it. It still has that appeal, that charm, that thing that brought us all here instead of City X up the road or City Y down the road. That's why we came. That's the value in what we have. We let that go away, the genie goes out of the bottle, it's not going back. So I don't know if we've given enough direction or input to the staff, but I'll let the city manager opine, and then we'll turn it back to the city attorney to see if you wanted to ask any specific questions, so there's any doubt in your mind. Before I do that, Colin, not big on the few making decision for the many in terms of whether you volunteer to be in a district or out of a district. I do favor the fact, and the city attorney's counsel to me is, as many as 2 or 3 could be designated as a local district if those 2 or 3 were in for a pound, not a penny, and said, hey, we've 3 homes, we 4 homes, we 2 homes, we want to be called a local historic district. Have at it. I don't know why under today's rules you would do that, other than amazing moral courage and fortitude and wealth to be able to do that, but I'd like to incentivize you to do that. And if as few as as few as 2 or 3 can do that and have a cluster of those, and that grows and grows and grows as we find ways to incent that, hallelujah, that would be just delightful. So I don't favor reduction of a percentage of vote. I'm not sure, I think Commissioner Hartman's point about the demo amount of time before you allow a demolition and the fine for if you do it illegally, I think those two are related. I said, I'd be for shortening the time, because time is money, as many of us understand from a business perspective. So if I've got to wait 120 days, it might be worth it for me to pay a fine. But if I make it all reasonable, and it's a reasonable amount of time to delay, as Mr. Mathan points out, hey, you got to have the advertisement and find out what's reasonable, what advertisement, so we can possibly get someone to move the home, fix the home, buy the home, something like that. I love that. But it's got to be a balance. But if you choose to ignore what our rule is, that will annoy me to no end, and I would love you to be punished for that. But I don't want it to be exorbitant amount of time that you got to wait and spend your money just waiting. So I think there's a balance in number of days to wait and the fine. Those are my 3 points on those 3 ones. Mr. Rashadat, you have got opinion on this, having been here a long time.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's been an interesting discussion. Obviously, it's not an easy topic. I've seen some other topics that almost similar to this one, where it's almost the issue is divided. But the way I see it is, and I think some of you have said it, it's what do you find historic? So if I built a shack in 1910, is that a historic today or not? I think there is some characteristic in this city that we need to protect. There is no question about it. But I think you have to use the incentives to do that. And so what happened with the Women's Club? Why is it for sale today? It's because of the cost. So The bottom line is, I mean, if we're asking people to protect and preserve their homes at a cost of which they cannot afford to do that, what are their options? What were the options of the city that we have to put the building out for sale, and that's supposed to be a historic building? So somehow we have to make it more incentive. And if we need to do that, then the city has to come up and walk the walk. And if we need to do that, then we need to put money up front and help these residents to protect their homes. Otherwise, how could we ask them to protect their homes and they cannot even afford to buy bread on their table? So my thing is we listen to the comments. If the commission wishes, we could go back, address some of these comments and bring it back to you. Or we could maybe have maybe an hour with the staff to see if we could come up with some options for the commission to consider. But I think it's important to make it more attractive to somebody to protect the home. And then we need to come up with a definition for a historic building. So I remember the old gentleman that his house was on the North Beach and went to the Historic Preservation Board and was denied and came to the commission. I mean, the house wasn't even livable in, but then the Historic Board wants to preserve it, and rightfully so. But at what cost? So, and I don't think there is any grants available for private homes. I think the grants available for government. I haven't seen anyone for, unless if the city wants to do that separately, that's one thing, so. Thank you,
sir.
Yes.
Yeah, go.
Colin, as you just said, the grants that we've gotten, for the most part, the city is not for private sector, for the public sector. So that explains why we have gotten significant historic grants, but it's not there for a personal homeowner. How would we even... How could we come up with meaningful, valuable grants to help? Because we know the problem. You just identify a problem. So, I mean, there's a number of homes that I can use around town that are old historic homes, but it's going to take $1 million, maybe even more. How can New Smyrna create its own grant to be able to help fund those kinds of things? Is that logical?
I think you have to put a procedure in place in order to evaluate the structure that you're submitting. It's exactly how we will submit a grant application to the state or to the federal. I mean, that structure is evaluated by us and by them. So if somebody submitted a grant application for a structure that we don't think it's worth to be preserved, then we will not even consider it. So I think there's a criteria need to be set in order to evaluate the grant and also the structure that you're trying to preserve.
So where's the funding coming from, even if we all agree?
Well, that's what I said. The city, if the city wants to do that, then the city has to come up with some type of funding out of its budget.
So do we, I mean, we go back to Ms. Gillespie's idea of a voter referendum. You know, the city did it with the Turnbull watershed.
Yeah.
I mean, my heart tells me one thing, my brain tells me another on whether or not I think that the residents would support something like that. I would love to see it, but there's a lot into this. Do you want something tonight on those 3 issues? Do you want us to move forward on? I think we should at least move forward on those 3 important issues that were brought up, that were identified by staff as it seems to be.
Let me make one.
I just want, the grant. According to Section 5030, there is hereby established a historic preservation grant program for owners of contributing structures in either a national or local, and it references the ordinances. And as a matter of fact, and there's income eligibility, and there's a bunch of things for eligibility. This is, I mean, I'm just reading from the proposed, and in fact, one of the requirements is that this thing is supposed to be demolished before you can get a grant, but it has to be owner-occupied. So my note on it was asking if owner-occupied condemned house is an oxymoron, but nevertheless, is this grant program there or not there?
Well, it's right now, there's nothing there, it's all proposed.
No,
Correct?
no,
It's
there are
existing
ordinance
language.
references.
I just don't know if there's a funding source.
There's
Bob
no
can
funding.
speak to it.
Okay. So yes, currently we do have a grant program. The funds come out of the building department's demolition fund. And so the rules have been set of how they can spend that money. And so the grant cannot be more than what the cost of demoing the structure. So if the building department says, okay, their contractor's going to charge $3,000 to tear the house down, they can give a grant up to $3,000 to the homeowner. Unfortunately, part of that process is the Builders Trade Board has to condemn the structure before they can issue
Where we
money.
get back to the owner-occupied condemned house oxymoron. But nevertheless, I mean, it's clearly not enough, and my notes are there. But there is this minimal thing in existence.
$3,000 is not going to preserve a home.
Oh, I
so-
agree.
Right.
I agree. I'm not disputing that, but when we're saying that there's no grant, and yet
Well, I
I'm
mean,
reading about the grant, I'm
Right.
confused.
But the grant's coming from a demolition fund that's controlled by the building department. So we can only use that money based on their rules. And so that legislation that you're looking at took their rules and tried to make a program out of it, so.
No, understood, just there is a grant that exists. That's it.
We discussed an unfunded grant.
No, it's funded.
Yeah, but but of no consequence, right? Nobody's going to nobody's going to
Right.
use
Hey,
$3
and
grand.
you have to be an owner-occupied condemned house, so
Yeah.
Right. So it has to be an owner-occupied house, and for them to apply, the building official has to condemn it so that it can release his funds out of his demolition permit.
But I think it exemplifies this. I'm still not quite sure where we're going. We haven't defined what it is we want to preserve, and yet we're debating the penalties for something we haven't defined.
Well, that's what I was saying, it's the definition of historic structure. I mean, it's
Do we have to start from ground zero, or are there other models that you could find in other places who've been down this path before us? St. Augustine, Newport, Rhode Island, another old town, Newport, Annapolis, Maryland.
St. Petersburg, if we look at I think all it would take, look at Savannah, look at St. Augustine, look at St. Pete, look at their grant programs and see how they're doing it.
Yeah, because their regulations are a lot stricter than what we even have on the books today. So in St. Augustine, you can't dig a hole without an archaeologist there.
Yeah.
So,
There's got to be some way to incent this, and I don't know if I haven't run the numbers yet, but is there a longer-term tax incentive that somebody would gamble with and say, hey, if I had 10 years of very little city tax, it's only 27 cents on the dollar. Does that ever
So we have
pencil?
that, it is 10 years, and it's for the improvement.
Yeah, right now it's just for the improvements, but I would, just to make it worth their while, I'd say, hey, on your entire structure. That's just my personal bias.
Has anybody looked at the numbers? Because my question is what does it mean annually? $5,
Yes,
5,000? I have no idea what it means
Yes, we
annually in
have.
that context.
It's also in this packet. I have an application from one of the HPC board members. He's the only person that I know that has applied for a tax credit. And for example, a $200,000 remodel for over the 10 years, he's going to save about $200 a year in tax money. It's very insignificant.
Yeah, it wasn't.
So it's hardly worth
As the
it.
way the rules are written today, it's on your improvement.
Yeah.
But if we had it on your entire value of your home,
Well,
Now you're
and the
talking
other
some money.
problem, I'm going to pass this to you guys just because the length of time that this person and staff has to fill this out, and he actually is an engineer.
Can
It's
we look
not worth
forward
it.
a little bit? I mean, we all know that there's been lots and lots of problems in the past for a lot of things, but I think for a workshop, the question is okay, there's issues. Now, what can we do to make the future better?
yeah. Well, I just threw up one, and I don't mean to be the only one, but if we gave them a bonus, not a bonus, but we gave them an entire tax break on the entire structure, of significant consequence. Somebody run those numbers and find out whether that's, 10,000 a year or, or
And is the city tax the only thing that we can affect?
great question.
Because I would tell you that on a homesteaded property can only go up 3% anyway. So if someone puts in a certain amount of value, 250, 500, a million, that their ad valorem tax revenue would be capped at what's existing, so they wouldn't have to pay more for the improvements. That, I'm not saying that's the best, but I'm saying that may produce the kind of money where people say, hey, that's a good investment, but we would be able, but county, school board.
Well, those ones you cannot take them away. So I think it's what the mayor is mentioning is the 27%, which is that's a percentage out of your tax bill that is going to the city, depending on the property value. Then so, like, say if you're paying, say if you pay $5,000 property tax overall, and say 27% of that is a city. So you're talking about $1,400.
What about something like Victoria, which is being run as a bed and breakfast? A lot of money was put into that property, beautiful property now, but it's not a home. But how do you, they did that without any grants. It would have been nice, but how do we encourage people to do the same kind of thing with these historic properties? But they spent, I don't know how much they spent, but it had to be well over $1 million in just the improvements.
You could do that, but keep in mind too taking the taxes out, that's still money coming out of your budget. So just keep that in mind. And not only that, but if you wanted to administer those grants, then you need to have some more staff, because you need to have some more staff to be involved in it. So it's not just give them the incentive. There's quite a bit of work that needs to be done to go along with that. So it's not an easy process, but it could be done.
And I agree with that, and that's part of this entire document. As I read through it, there's a lot of issues that I find with it. If we're going to move towards true incentives, we're going to need a full-time staff person, a grant person, someone to manage all these programs. Now, I'm for that, and I'm willing to commit to that. But I think what we need to find is, has anybody done it? And I think the mayor alluded to this, right? Has anybody in the state or in the country actually done this already to where it's a nice, tangible amount of incentive?
I'm not aware, but I guess we will do some research for that. I don't know unless if Bob did one already, but I would reach out to the Managers Association to see if any of the cities have done a program, what type of program, and can I get an idea from them?
Any other discussion before the city attorney tells us what she's been writing notes about where she thinks we're headed? And maybe the idea with this workshop was to have a fulsome discussion, as Commissioner Martin continues to point out, about where do we go moving forward. It's painful for me to listen to Commissioner Perrine talk about all the things that had befell many folks previously. It hurts to listen to that, and it's upsetting. I can't make them whole yet, or ever, but we can fix it for the next tranche, the people that are here while we're on the dais, and I hope we can do that.
I have a question on the incentives. How would you handle the homes that the people have already spent hundreds of thousands doing their own house, and now it's kind of like the tuition reimbursement program? You're not going to please half the people, because 50% are not going to be happy with any incentives because they shelled it out of their own pocket.
It's like buying, we frequently buy something that the next day goes on sale. Well, sucks to be you. You bought it that day. We have to put a stake in the sand and say, I think of a lot of tax breaks that go to people now that weren't available when I was coming along. Timing's everything. I came too soon. So we have to just say, look, timing.
I see people squirming in the audience when you.
Yeah,
I
well,
understand, but retroactive is really a problem, and I'm not sure that how far do we go back? Do we go back 80 years, 20 years, 1 year? I mean, retroactive is a big deal to think about.
The other big deal in my mind is that Mr. Rashadat points out, it says, this is funding to do the current jobs that we're doing today, and I'm going to try and, if the idea is to try to give that back, then unless you buy into the historic nature of our town floats all boats and increases all property values, and if the residents buy into that, then we're on our way. Because the majority do not own historic homes. The majority own something other than that. And so if the majority is willing to help the minority of people that own these homes prop up their values, and I sincerely think that is what happens, then we're on our way. But if the citizenry says, no, I got mine, I don't really care what you do over there, then that's a hard pill to swallow, but it could be exactly the way our citizens feel. I don't know, sitting here right now today. I have my opinion about the historic nature of every neighborhood, all those 500 homes sprinkled around or wherever they are. Does that attract people to come here and to buy here and force the market up? I think it does. But I don't want to do it to cut off our nose to spite our face. If we limit the amount of money that we're bringing in to run this city, which is what you're saying effectively happens, that has a consequence as well. So I don't have the answer figured out. That's why I implore us to go to other cities, not just in the state, but in the country, those landmark cities who may have already stepped in those potholes that we don't have to step in.
But if the commission wishes, I know staff would like to get some directions on some of the three major issues. But if the commission wishes for us to go back and look at some programs and come back to you with some suggestions, I'm not sure that would be a good suggestion, but at least come back with something for you. I think we'll do that, and we might have to have another, either another workshop or maybe an hour before the city commission meeting.
So let me just get a consensus from our group. Let's say, yes, sir, go right ahead.
So we all know, or I think we're all in agreement that what we currently have isn't working. It's hard to read, it's hard to follow. It leaves a lot of questions, it leaves more questions than it does answers. So to do nothing and to keep that document in place while we go through this process to make it better, whoever comes in the next 3 months, 4 months, is going to be living with the old document. The new document at least makes it readable. And if I buy a historic home and I'm doing my own due diligence like you should do when you buy any property, I go, oh, it's in a historic district. Let me go to chapter 50. Oh, there's a legible document that I can read and I can understand. And then as we go on, we can fix these problems going forward by making amendments to the original document. But we're required by statute to have a document. And to leave the existing antiquated old one in place for months while we try to work through this, I think isn't the right answer either. And I'm, you know, so I think we need to think about that also, and tweak what we have before us, maybe to get us through until we can get some of these other things on hold. Yeah. But I mean, Bob, how often does it come before us? Not that often, or?
What, updates of chapter 50? I believe the last major one was 2013.
Right. So if you at least get the structured document fixed to where you have, you know, vocabulary, you have definitions, and you have what's a local, what's a historic, and so forth and so on. In the interim, while we talk about incentives, while we talk about adding commercial buildings, when we talk about incentivizing some of these things, which I'm 100% for, I certainly do think that, then I think at least we would have a base document to work from. But what we have now, and I think everybody in the room would agree, the current document has been piecemealed over 20, 30 years, and it just doesn't work.
So I speak in favor of Commissioner Hartman's idea that we're not one and done, and that if you're a physician taking the Hippocratic oath of do no harm, it would do no harm to fix 3 things expeditiously and actually help, but then no ease up on the pressure to get where we're going in the future. And so not let you come back next year, but come back in a few months with some of the ideas about how to go. So not one and done, maybe 2 or 3 and done. So I love the idea. Fix the 3 and then move on, and then have us vote on it, and then as expeditiously as possible by your directing the staff, go to the next steps that you hear all 5 of us talking about. I think that's a beautiful solution and actually offers something to the public that we did listen, and we're ready to move as expeditiously as we can on what's easily fixed, and we will not rush to judgment on the future, but we will study it and practice through our experts, both in the city attorney's office and at the development services office, to get it where it one day could be.
I have one more comment about our chapter 52. The Alliance actually had worked with an attorney that specializes in chapter 50, and he supported what our attorney pretty much said. There was only just a couple minor changes. So this group actually had a line-by-line attorney that does this for historic districts. And so we have actually 2 attorneys' findings, and that's our own, plus this man. So I support what the Alliance and their attorney stated along with Carrie's. So I would suggest that we try to make those minor changes that to clean it up, that Carrie has spent a long time on, years, and go forward, and we can easily vote on the 3 things. And then to start over from ground zero, that may take longer than this board has left on terms. So at least that will get us somewhere. And it sounded like we're pretty much in unison with the 3 items. When we get to those 3 items within here, we can vote on that. But I would suggest we work with Carrie and change by section with what she and the Alliance attorney have done.
I would ask that any future workshops be directed at what are we trying to accomplish? What do we mean by historic preservation? What is historic preservation? And then how do we find a way to make it happen? So,
Yeah, that's future looking. That's
constructive rather than destructive, if you will. Yeah, a path forward.
without any objection, with consensus of the 5 of us. We, I think, said the city attorney, we'd like you to fix the 3 things, and what those numbers wind up being, we'll vote on each of those as we go, but if you would fix that section, and then the other things that you, madam, not on your own, and with whatever counsel you determine, if it's, with other attorneys or whatever other remedies you'd like to, if you just fix those, point those out to us, and bring that back post haste. Without objection, sir?
No, but I do have a question to both Bob and Carrie, is can we include commercial in this document? Because I think that was a point, that it's just strictly residential and not commercial buildings, historical buildings. Or do you see
It
that
can include
as a
commercial.
non-issue?
I think you really take a look at the building. So I don't see a problem with it being commercial versus residential.
Right.
Practically-
Right now, we have both as contributing structures in those
Okay.
national districts.
Right.
So what I don't want to happen is, I don't want us getting to the point where staff brings us something on the agenda, and then we're all looking at each other like, oh, no, that's not what I meant. Do we want any more clarity, or do we feel that we have clarity on what we have tasked staff to do?
Why don't we ask what she thinks we've meant, and if that trips your trigger, then great. If it doesn't, we'll make a correction. Go for it, Madam City Attorney.
So I've heard no reduction in the consent requirement, so it would either stay at 2/3 or go higher, possibly up to 100%. I heard a lot about incentivizing and not being punitive. At the same time, I also, if you raise it to 100% and anyone who goes in is completely voluntary, then there's less pressure on the demo delay and the penalty. So we could also look at somewhere halfway between 5 and 25, and we can kick that around with the planners and see what their recommendation is. And then the demo delay, kind of working with Bob to figure out like what is an appropriate time. Is it 60 days? 90 kind of, but it sounded like we would either stay at 120 or go south with that.
And we can vote on those independently as we go along.
And then when we bring a draft back, you all can single it out. If you don't like any of it, somebody can make a motion to make it whatever you prefer it to be.
And the last piece is, can you add the historic district? I mean, can you add the commercial along with residential property in this next iteration, or is that a lot?
Sure, I believe it's in there, but we will make sure it's clarified.
Let me ask a question. I brought this up. The intent and purpose makes a lot of sense for, as I said, public properties. The document, and I'm not saying we need to change this now, but I think we need to look at this document as two sections, one for public policy and then another one for private properties. The intent and purpose is, there's a disconnect there. I know that sounds general. I haven't give you a specific response, but maybe that's something I'll talk with staff about.
Correct.
And can be discussed later.
The intent and purpose is usually your justification for adopting the ordinance as a whole. But when we met, legal and planning met and went through, there were some things we could clarify to make it clear, like, okay, this is when you're dealing with public property, this is when you're dealing with private property. And we can make sure that the private property, is delineated and it's more towards the voluntary consent. I think probably we'll go to 100%, and then you all decide if you want to go down to 2/3 or. But I think we have some tweaks we can make. We can tighten it up, but we hear positive, not punitive. Not going below 2/3. Looking at the demo delay and the penalty, and kind of gearing it more towards incentivizing.
So what I hear you saying is that when we get it back, we can go, each of those three, we can have a look at, and let's say we differ on the percent, right? We could vote line by line and have it adjusted by our vote.
Absolutely.
Comfortable with that? Okay, I've
Yes.
got nods across the room. Anything else from the city manager, city attorney?
No, thank you. I think we're fine.
Madam City Clerk, anything?
No, sir.
Mr. Niebert? No, sir. Okay, very good. Anything else from any of my colleagues? Thank you very much for coming tonight. You're watching your government at work. We're adjourned.